The Zephyrian Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as delegates from 12 different species gathered around the crystalline conference table. Ambassador Kethavar of the Zephyrians tapped his four-fingered hand against the smooth surface, his pale blue skin showing the stress patterns that betrayed his anxiety. The holographic displays floating above the table showed the same devastating news that had brought them all here. The hegemony fleet was 3 star systems away and closing fast. "We need allies," Kethavar announced to the assembled delegates. "The hegemony has already consumed 17 worlds in the Outer Rim. Our combined fleets cannot match their firepower." His voice carried the weight of desperation that had become all too familiar in recent months. The insectoid representative from Chitara clicked her mandibles in agreement. "Our intelligence reports indicate they have over 3,000 vessels in their main battle group. We have perhaps 800 between all our worlds combined." A rumble came from the massive Gorvak delegate, his rocky hide shifting as he leaned forward. "Then we die with honor. Better than surrendering to those who would enslave our children." "Wait," interrupted Dr. Liana Vasquez, the human representative who had been quietly observing from her seat. She was small compared to most of the other delegates, but there was something in her calm demeanor that commanded attention. "Before we resign ourselves to a glorious death, perhaps we should consider other options." The room fell silent. Humans were relatively new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Most species viewed them as enthusiastic but inexperienced newcomers who had yet to face real hardship among the stars. "Humans have limited military resources," Kethavar said gently, not wanting to offend their newest ally. "Your home fleet consists of perhaps 30 vessels. We appreciate the gesture, but..." Dr. Vasquez smiled, and something about that expression made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. "I wasn't offering our fleet, Ambassador. I was suggesting we contact someone who might be more helpful." "Another human?" asked the Chitaran delegate, confusion evident in her translated voice. "Not just any human," Dr. Vasquez replied, pulling up her personal communication device. "Someone who has dealt with the hegemony before. Someone who made them think twice about expanding in his direction." The delegates exchanged glances. The hegemony had been expanding unopposed for over a decade. No one had successfully resisted them, let alone made them hesitate. "His name is Marcus Chen," Dr. Vasquez continued, her fingers dancing over the device's interface, "though most people in this part of the galaxy know him by a different name." "What name?" Kethavar asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "The Ghost of Titan Station." The reaction was immediate and electric. Several delegates recoiled in their seats. The Gorvak delegate's rocky features actually showed fear for the first time anyone could remember. The Chitaran's antennae twitched rapidly in what could only be described as panic. "You're suggesting we contact that human?" Kethavar's voice was barely above a whisper. The one who single-handedly held off a hegemony siege for 6 months," Dr. Vasquez finished. "The one who turned their own weapons against them. The one who made an entire battle fleet disappear without a trace. The stories say he's a monster," the Chitaran delegate protested, "that he shows no mercy to his enemies, that he uses tactics so brutal even the hegemony considers them war crimes." Dr. Vasquez's expression grew serious. "The stories also say he's never lost a battle, and that he only fights those who threaten the innocent." She looked around the table at each delegate in turn. "Right now, that's exactly what we need." The chamber fell into an uncomfortable silence as each species representative grappled with the implications. They had heard whispers about the human called the Ghost of Titan Station. Rumors spread through dark corners of space stations and in hushed conversations between merchant pilots. Most had assumed they were exaggerated tales, the kind of stories that grew in the telling. But if even half of what they'd heard was true... "Can you contact him?" Kethavar finally asked, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Dr. Vasquez nodded. "He owes me a favor. A big one." She paused, her finger hovering over the communication controls. "But I need you all to understand something before I make this call. Marcus Chen is not like other humans. He's not like anyone, really. If he agrees to help us, there will be consequences. The hegemony will never forget what happens here. They already want to enslave or kill us all," the Gorvak delegate rumbled. "How much worse could it get?" Dr. Vasquez's smile returned, but this time it was tinged with something that looked almost like pity. "You'd be surprised. She activated the communication array, sending a tight beam transmission toward a set of coordinates that existed on no official star charts. The delegates waited in tense silence as the signal traveled through subspace, reaching out across the void to find one man who might be their salvation or their doom. Minutes passed before a response came through. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a figure seated in what appeared to be the command center of a small but heavily modified ship. Marcus Chen looked ordinary enough at first glance. Medium height, dark hair showing traces of gray at the temples, unremarkable features that wouldn't stand out in a crowd. But his eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, done too much, and carried the weight of countless decisions that others could never understand. "Hello, Liana," he said, his voice carrying across the light years with crystal clarity. "It's been a while." "Hello, Marcus," Dr. Vasquez replied. "We need your help." Marcus Chen's gaze shifted to take in the other delegates around the table. Each one felt as though they were being measured, evaluated, and judged in those few seconds of scrutiny. "The hegemony?" he asked simply. 3,000 ships. 3 systems away. We have maybe 800 vessels between all of us. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his words sent chills through every delegate present. "I'll be there in 18 hours. Tell your fleets to stay out of my way." The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in absolute silence. None of the delegates spoke as they grappled with what they had just done. They had called upon a legend, a ghost story made flesh, a human whose reputation was whispered in fear across half the galaxy. Now all they could do was wait and hope they had made the right choice. 18 hours later, the Allied fleet hung in formation around Zephyr Prime. Their 800 ships arranged in defensive patterns that felt woefully inadequate against the approaching storm. The massive hegemony fleet had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, their dark vessels spreading across space like an infection. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of the flagship Luminous Dawn, watching his tactical displays with growing dread. 3,000 enemy ships moved in perfect formation, their weapons already charging. The hegemony never bothered with negotiations or surrender demands. They simply took what they wanted. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission." It's him." The view screen flickered to life, showing Marcus Chen seated in what looked like a command chair, but the background was different now. Instead of the small ship from yesterday, he appeared to be aboard something much larger, though the details were obscured by shadows. "Admiral Kethvar," Marcus said without preamble, "I need you to do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you to do it. No questions, no hesitation." "Can you do that?" Kethvar swallowed hard. "Yes, but I don't see your ship on our sensors." "Where are you?" "Closer than you think. In 30 seconds, I need your entire fleet to jump to the coordinates I'm transmitting now. Stay there for exactly 10 minutes, then return to this position." "But that will leave the planet defenseless," Kethvar protested. Marcus Chen's expression didn't change. "Admiral, do you trust me to save your people, or would you prefer to watch them die while maintaining your defensive formation?" The brutal directness of the question hit Kethvar like a physical blow. Around the bridge, his officers waited for orders, their faces showing the same mixture of fear and desperate hope that he felt. "Coordinates received," his navigator reported. "It's empty space, sir. Nothing there but asteroids." "All ships," Kethvar announced over the fleet communication channel. "Prepare for emergency jump on my mark." He looked back at the view screen where Marcus Chen waited with infinite patience. "We're trusting you with everything." "I know," Marcus replied simply. "Mark." The Allied fleet vanished in a cascade of hyperspace translations, leaving Zephyr Prime apparently defenseless. The hegemony forces immediately accelerated, sensing easy victory. Their massive dreadnoughts led the charge, weapon systems glowing with barely contained energy. What happened next would be talked about in hushed whispers for generations. The space around the hegemony fleet began to shimmer, as if reality itself was becoming uncertain. Then, without warning, explosions began blooming throughout their formation. Not the bright flashes of energy weapons, but the devastating implosions of ships being torn apart from within. "What's happening?" screamed Commander Vexistar from the bridge of the hegemony flagship Eternal Dominion. "Report." "Unknown, sir," his tactical officer replied, panic evident in his synthesized voice. "Ships are just dying. No weapons fire detected, no incoming missiles, nothing. On the displays, hegemony vessels were disintegrating in clusters. Dreadnoughts that had conquered a dozen worlds simply came apart at the seams, their hulls peeling away like flower petals. Smaller ships vanished entirely, leaving nothing but empty space where they had been moments before. Shields up, all weapons targeting. Targeting what? Vextar demanded. There's nothing there. But the destruction continued. A pattern emerged from the chaos. The ships weren't being destroyed randomly. Something was moving through the hegemony formation with purpose and precision, selecting targets with surgical accuracy. Command ships died first, followed by heavy cruisers, then the vessels carrying the most dangerous weapons. "Sir," the communications officer reported, his voice shaking, "we're receiving a transmission. Audio only. Put it through," Vextar ordered. The voice that came through the speakers was calm, almost conversational. "Commander Vexitar of the Hegemony Expeditionary Force. My name is Marcus Chen. You have 3 minutes to order a full retreat, or I will continue destroying your ships one by one until none remain." "You're bluffing," Vextar snarled into the comm. "Show yourself, coward!" "Fight us honorably." The laugh that came in response was soft and utterly without humor. "Honor? You're in Zephyrian space without invitation, preparing to bombard civilian populations. You lost the right to talk about honor a long time ago." Another cluster of ships disappeared from the hegemony formation, simply ceasing to exist as if they had never been there at all. 2 minutes, 30 seconds, Marcus continued. "I should mention that I'm currently aboard your ammunition ship Crimson Fang, the one carrying the Nova bombs you were planning to use on the planet's surface. Interesting design, these weapons. Very unstable when their containment fields are modified." Vextar's blood went cold. The Crimson Fang was in the center of his formation, surrounded by dozens of other vessels. "If those Nova bombs detonated—" "You're insane," he whispered. "You'll die too." "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But I've made peace with that possibility."
Have you?
On the tactical display, the Crimson Fang's signature began fluctuating in ways that made Vextar's weapons officer back away from his console in terror. "Sir," the officer reported, "the containment fields on those Nova bombs are destabilizing. If they go critical, they'll take out half our fleet, and the planet will be safe," Marcus added helpfully over the comm. 1 minute, 45 seconds. Vexitar looked around his bridge at officers who had never known defeat, who had crushed entire civilizations beneath their boots, now staring at their displays in naked fear. He had risen through the hegemony ranks by being ruthless, calculating, and above all else, practical. He was practical enough to know when he was beaten. "All ships," he announced through gritted teeth. "Emergency hyperspace jump. Full retreat." "Wise choice," Marcus said as the hegemony fleet began its frantic withdrawal. "Commander, a word of advice. When you report this to your superiors, tell them that the human known as the Ghost of Titan Station is now protecting these worlds. Tell them what happened here today, and tell them that if they return next time, I won't offer them the chance to retreat." The last of the hegemony ships vanished into hyperspace, leaving empty space where moments before an unstoppable armada had threatened to end an entire civilization. The Allied fleet returned from their hiding place among the asteroids to find their home system quiet and peaceful, with no sign of the battle that had just taken place except for scattered debris floating in the void. "Marcus," Dr. Vasquez called over the comm. "Where are you? We can't see your ship." "I'm here," came his voice, and suddenly a vessel simply faded into visibility in the middle of their formation. It was unlike anything any of them had ever seen, sleek and angular, covered in what looked like shifting shadows that made it difficult to focus on directly. Stealth technology borrowed from some friends who prefer not to be mentioned. Admiral Kethvar stared at the impossible ship that had just appeared among his forces without triggering a single sensor alarm. What did you do to them?" "I reminded them that there are worse things in the universe than not getting what you want," Marcus replied. "Sometimes losing everything you have is worse than losing everything you want." The Allied fleet hung in space around the mysterious vessel, each crew member trying to process what they had just witnessed. An entire hegemony armada, the most feared military force in known space, had fled in terror from a single human and his invisible ship. As the reports began filtering back to governments and military commands across the galaxy, one thing became crystal clear. The balance of power in their region of space had just shifted dramatically. The hegemony had shown weakness, and worse, they had shown fear. And everyone now knew that there was a human out there who could make even the galaxy's greatest predators turn and run. 3 days after the hegemony retreat, Marcus Chen sat alone in the observation deck of his ship, the Phantasm, watching the repair crews work on the Allied vessels below. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he didn't seem to notice. The weight of old memories pressed down on him like a physical force. Dr. Liana Vasquez found him there when she arrived aboard. His ship for what she had called a private conversation. She had known Marcus for 15 years, since before he became the ghost of Titan Station, when he was just another human trying to make his way in a galaxy that didn't quite know what to do with his species. "The Allied Council wants to offer you a formal position," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "Supreme Military Advisor with full authority over defensive strategies for all 12 worlds." Marcus didn't look away from the viewport. "They're afraid of me." "Yes," Liana admitted, "but they're more afraid of the hegemony coming back. And after what happened 3 days ago, they want you on their side permanently. What happened 3 days ago was necessary. That doesn't make it right." Liana studied her old friend's profile, noting the new lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible burden. "You saved millions of lives, Marcus. The hegemony would have strip-mined those worlds and enslaved the survivors." "I know." His voice was quiet, distant. "Do you want to know what I did to their ships?" She wasn't sure she did, but she nodded anyway. "Nanobots," Marcus said, finally turning to face her. "Microscopic machines that eat through metal and circuitry. I deployed them when I first detected the hegemony fleet entering the system. They spread from ship to ship through docking connections, maintenance ports, even EVA suits." "How long did you have them?" 6 months. I've been tracking hegemony movements ever since Titan Station." He stood and walked to the viewport, placing his hand against the transparent aluminum. "The nanobots were designed to lie dormant until activated. Every hegemony ship that passed through this sector in the last 6 months got infected." Liana felt a chill run down her spine. "How many ships are we talking about?" 7 fleets, maybe 8. Roughly 15,000 vessels. Marcus's reflection in the viewport looked haunted. "I could activate them right now if I wanted to. Cripple the entire hegemony war machine in a matter of hours. Then why don't you?" Marcus turned back to her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her understand why the hegemony feared him so much. Because genocide is still genocide even when it's justified. Even when it would save countless innocent lives. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Liana had known Marcus was dangerous. His reputation made that clear. But she was beginning to understand that his greatest weapon wasn't his technology or his tactical brilliance. It was his restraint. "Tell me about Titan Station," she said softly. Marcus closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked older than his 43 years. Titan Station was a research facility. My wife Sarah worked there, developing new agricultural techniques for terraform projects. It was supposed to be safe, far from any conflict zones. He sat back down, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The hegemony needed the station's resources for their war effort. They gave the 12,000 civilians aboard exactly 1 hour to evacuate before they planned to take it by force. "You were there?" "I was visiting Sarah, just a routine trip to see how her work was progressing." His voice became mechanical, as if reciting a technical report. "The evacuation ships could only carry 8,000 people. The hegemony refused to extend the deadline." Liana waited, knowing there was more. "So I stayed behind with 4,000 volunteers, scientists, engineers, maintenance workers, people who chose to fight rather than abandon their friends." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. "We held them off for 6 months. Turned their own weapons against them, used their tactics, became everything they feared about humanity. And Sarah died in the first week. Plasma burn from a hegemony raider that got through our defenses." His voice cracked slightly. "I kept fighting because it was what she would have wanted. To protect the innocent no matter the cost." "What happened to the 4,000 volunteers?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Liana thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 312 survived. The rest, he shrugged helplessly. The rest gave everything they had so that 8,000 civilians could live. So that the hegemony would learn that attacking human settlements came with a price. "Is that when you became the ghost?" That's when I realized that sometimes the only way to protect the innocent is to become the monster that monsters fear. Marcus stood again, pacing to the far wall where weapons and equipment hung in precise arrangements. After Titan Station, the hegemony avoided human space for almost 5 years. Word spread about what one human could do when pushed too far. But they didn't stop expanding elsewhere. No, they just became more careful about which targets they chose. His laugh was bitter. I saved my people by becoming something that even my own government wanted to disavow. Do you know what my official status is with Earth Command? Lyanna shook her head. Dead, killed in action during the defense of Titan Station. It was easier for them to pretend I didn't exist than to explain why they couldn't control me. Yet you keep fighting. Marcus turned back to the viewport, watching as a Zephyrian repair crew worked on their damaged cruiser. Someone has to. The galaxy is full of bullies who think might makes right. The hegemony is just the biggest one. The Allied Council wants to know if you'll accept their offer. Tell them yes, Marcus said without hesitation, but with conditions. I work alone, I choose my own methods, and when this is over, I disappear again. They don't get to parade me around as their pet monster. And if the hegemony returns in force, with more ships than even you can handle? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she'd arrived, it almost reached his eyes. Then I'll do what I always do, Lyanna. I'll make them remember that humans don't just fight to win. We fight to make sure our enemies never want to face us again. Outside the viewport, the Allied fleet continued its repairs while long-range sensors kept watch for any sign of returning threats. But in the depths of space, traveling through hyperspace toward distant hegemony strongholds, another kind of message was being delivered. The nanobots that Marcus had deployed months ago were still there, dormant but ready. A sword of Damocles hanging over the heads of every hegemony commander, who thought they understood the limits of human warfare. As Lyanna prepared to return to her own ship with Marcus's answer for the Allied Council, she realized that they had all made a fundamental mistake. They thought they were gaining a powerful ally in their fight against the hegemony. In reality, they had just unleashed something far more dangerous than any enemy fleet. They had given the ghost of Titan Station a reason to hunt again. 2 weeks after accepting the Allied Council's offer, Marcus Chen received an encrypted message that changed everything. He was aboard the Phantasm, conducting routine patrols near the Chitaran homeworld, when his communication array lit up with an emergency transmission from deep space. The holographic projector flickered to life, revealing a figure Marcus hadn't seen in 3 years. Captain Elena Torres of the Earth Alliance Navy, his former commanding officer and one of the few people who knew the truth about what happened at Titan Station. Marcus, she said, her face grim with urgency. We have a problem. The hegemony isn't planning to return to Zephyrian space. They're heading for Earth. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Confirmed. 3 separate intelligence sources. They're assembling the largest battle fleet in their history. Over 8,000 ships, including their entire Dreadnought class. They call it the Final Solution Fleet. Timeline? 6 weeks, maybe 7. They're being careful this time, taking a route that avoids all known human patrol routes. Elena paused, her expression softening slightly. Marcus, they're not just planning to conquer Earth. After what you did to them at Zephyr Prime, they want to make an example. Complete extermination of the human species. Marcus stared at the hologram for several long seconds, his mind racing through calculations and possibilities. 8,000 ships against Earth's defensive fleet of perhaps 200 vessels. It wouldn't even be a battle. It would be a massacre. What does Earth Command want from me? He asked finally. Officially? Nothing. You're still dead, remember? Elena's smile was bitter. Unofficially? They're desperate enough to accept help from anyone, even a ghost. And unofficially? Admiral Chen wants to speak with you. Privately. Your brother has some ideas about how to handle this. Marcus closed his eyes. David Chen, 2 years younger but somehow always the responsible one. The one who had risen through proper channels to become one of Earth's most respected fleet commanders. The one who still believed their parents would be proud of what he'd accomplished. Send me the coordinates, Marcus said. I'll be there in 48 hours. Marcus, Elena called out before he could close the connection. There's something else. The hegemony has been asking questions about you. Specifically, they want to know how one human destroyed an entire battle fleet without losing a single ship. They're scared, and scared enemies do unpredictable things. After the transmission ended, Marcus sat alone in his command center, staring at the star charts that showed the most direct route to Earth. His home, the world where Sarah had been born, where they had met at university, where they had planned to retire after her research was complete. The world he hadn't seen since the day he left to visit her at Titan Station. 48 hours later, the Phantasm materialized in a classified section of space near Jupiter's moons, where a small fleet of Earth Alliance vessels waited in defensive formation. Marcus's ship was immediately surrounded by escorts, their weapons powered but not aimed, a show of caution rather than hostility. Admiral David Chen waited aboard the flagship Armstrong, in the same conference room where Marcus had once received his first deep space assignment 15 years ago. The two brothers stood facing each other across a holographic display table, the weight of years and choices hanging between them like a physical barrier. "You look older," David said finally. "You look like Dad," Marcus replied. Same uniform, same serious expression when dealing with impossible problems. "This problem is impossible, Marcus. 8,000 ships and we have no idea how to stop them." David activated the display, showing detailed intelligence reports about the approaching hegemony fleet. "Our best projections give us a 12% chance of preventing total orbital bombardment." Marcus studied the data, his tactical mind automatically cataloging strengths and weaknesses, potential strategies and likely outcomes. "Where's the fleet now?" 3 weeks out, taking the long route through the Veil Nebula. "They think we don't know they're coming. But you do. Intelligence breakthrough 6 months ago. We cracked their quantum encryption." David paused, studying his brother's face. "The question is, what do we do with the knowledge?" Marcus was quiet for several minutes, absorbing the tactical situation. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and certain. "We end this permanently." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we stop playing defense and start playing offense. The hegemony has been expanding for 50 years because no one has ever hit them where it really hurts." Marcus manipulated the holographic display, zooming out to show the entire hegemony territory. "They're sending 8,000 ships to destroy Earth. That leaves their core worlds protected by maybe 2,000 vessels spread across 30 systems." David felt his stomach drop as he realized what his brother was suggesting. "You want to attack their homeworld while their fleet is committed to attacking ours. I want to do more than attack it. I want to make sure they never threaten anyone again." "Marcus, that's..." David struggled for words. "That's genocide." "No," Marcus said quietly. "Genocide is what they're planning for humanity. This is prevention." The brothers stared at each other across the table, representing two different philosophies of warfare. David had always believed in rules, in honor, in fighting clean even when the enemy didn't. Marcus had learned at Titan Station that sometimes the only way to protect the innocent was to become something worse than the enemy. "There has to be another way," David insisted. "Show me one." David worked frantically at the display, running simulation after simulation, trying to find a scenario where Earth survived without resorting to the wholesale destruction of hegemony civilian populations. Every model ended the same way, with human extinction. "I can't," he admitted finally. "Then we do this my way." Marcus pulled up a new set of coordinates. "I need 3 things from you. First, the exact location of every hegemony core world. Second, access to Earth's quantum communication network. Third, a promise that you'll never ask me how I'm planning to do this." "Marcus." David. "In 6 weeks, either humanity survives or it doesn't. Either the hegemony learns that we're not prey, or they finish what they started." Marcus's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "I've been preparing for this fight since Titan Station. Trust me to finish it." Admiral David Chen looked at his brother, the ghost, the legend, the monster that monsters feared, and made perhaps the most difficult decision of his military career. "What do you need me to do?" Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Keep their attention focused on the approaching fleet. Make them think you're preparing for a defensive battle. Let them believe they're going to win right up until the moment they realize they've already lost. And then I remind the galaxy why humans don't start wars," Marcus said as he prepared to leave. "We finish them." As the Phantasm disappeared back into the void, Admiral Chen stood alone in his conference room, staring at the tactical displays that showed humanity's approaching doom. He had just given his brother the tools to save their species, He only hoped the price wouldn't be too high for either of them to bear. The Hegemony High Command Center on Vorthak Prime hummed with activity as military leaders from across their empire gathered to witness what they called the final human solution. Supreme Commander. Malthea stood before a massive holographic display showing the positions of their 8,000-ship armada, now just 2 weeks from Earth. The human homeworld has increased its defensive preparations, reported Intelligence Director Kyvan, her scaled features reflecting the satisfaction of a predator closing in on wounded prey. They've recalled all outer system patrols and are concentrating their fleet in Earth orbit, exactly as our projections predicted. And what of the one they call the Ghost? Asked General Vextari, commander of the 3rd Assault Legion. Our forces at Zephyr Prime reported impossible casualties before we withdrew. Maltheus waved a dismissive hand. One ship, one human, no matter how clever his tricks. Our intelligence suggests he has returned to human space, probably to help in their futile defensive efforts. When we glass Earth's surface, we'll destroy him along with the rest of his pathetic species. None of them noticed the microscopic probe that had been attached to their communication array for the past 3 months, recording every word and transmitting the data through quantum channels to a receiver in the outer system. Aboard the Phantasm, hidden in the shadow of Vorthak Prime's outermost moon, Marcus Chen listened to the Hegemony's planning session while making final preparations for what would either be humanity's salvation or his own death. The ship's fabrication bay had been working non-stop for 2 weeks, producing specialized equipment that existed nowhere in any military database. How many civilian populations on their core worlds? He asked his ship's AI. Approximately 2.7 billion across all 15 primary systems, the AI responded in its neutral tone. An additional 800 million on secondary industrial worlds. Marcus nodded, his fingers dancing across control interfaces as he armed systems that he had hoped never to use. Evacuation protocols? Limited. Hegemony doctrine assumes their core worlds are invulnerable. Most civilian shelters are designed for natural disasters, not military assault. Time frame for what I'm planning? If executed simultaneously across all targets, approximately 4 hours for complete systemic collapse. Civilian casualties, the AI paused. Difficult to calculate. Potentially catastrophic. Marcus stared at the tactical display showing Hegemony fleet positions, 8,000 ships heading toward Earth, carrying enough firepower to sterilize every planet in human space. In 4 hours he could end that threat forever. All it would cost was his soul. His personal communicator chimed with an incoming message from his brother. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the small screen, exhaustion evident in every line. Marcus, they're accelerating their timeline. Our long-range scouts report the Hegemony fleet will reach Earth in 10 days, not 2 weeks. Whatever you're planning, it needs to happen soon. How are the preparations on your end? We've evacuated all non-essential personnel from Earth's orbital stations. The fleet is in defensive formation, but Marcus... David's voice cracked slightly. We both know how this ends if they reach us. Marcus looked around his ship's command center, at the weapon systems that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy, at the controls that would make him the greatest mass murderer in galactic history. David, I need you to know something. After today, after what I'm about to do, I won't be coming home. I can't. What are you talking about? The ghost of Titan Station dies today. What comes after? Marcus shook his head. What comes after isn't someone our parents would recognize. Marcus, wait. He cut the connection and activated the ship's intercom. AI, begin final countdown sequence. Authorization Chen 77 Alpha. Authorization confirmed. Final countdown initiated. All systems armed and ready. Marcus stood and walked to the observation deck where he could see Vorthak Prime hanging in space like a jewel, home to 300 million Hegemony citizens who had no idea their government was about to commit genocide against humanity. Civilians who would pay the price for their leader's ambitions. Sarah, he whispered to the void. Forgive me. He returned to the command center and placed his hand on the activation control. One touch would send the signal to dormant nanobots in 15 star systems. One touch would cripple the Hegemony's industrial base, destroy their remaining fleets, and leave their populations defenseless. One touch would save humanity and damn his own soul. His finger hovered over the control for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then, with the weight of billions of lives on his conscience, Marcus Chen made his choice. He pulled his hand away. AI, Abort final countdown. Initiate Protocol Lazarus instead. Protocol Lazarus. Marcus, that plan has a 73% probability of failure. Better than a 100% chance of becoming the monster I've been fighting against. Marcus quickly reconfigured his ship's systems, abandoning the plan that would have ended the war in 4 hours for something far more dangerous but infinitely more precise. Instead of activating every nanobot simultaneously, he would target only military assets. Instead of bringing down entire civilizations, he would cripple their war machine while leaving their populations intact. It would be harder. It would be riskier. It might not work at all, but it would let him sleep at night, assuming he lived through what came next. New target priority, he announced to his ship's tactical systems. Military installations only. Fleet bases, weapon manufacturing, command centers. Civilian areas are off limits, acknowledged. Recalculating attack vectors. As the Phantasm began moving toward its first target, Marcus opened a communication channel to Earth Command. His brother's face appeared on screen, showing surprise at the unexpected contact. David, I need you to do something for me. In approximately 6 hours, every hegemony military base in 15 systems is going to go dark simultaneously. Their fleet heading toward Earth will suddenly find themselves cut off from all support and supply lines. How are you? That's when you hit them. Not in Earth orbit where they can threaten civilian populations, but in deep space where you can use every dirty trick Dad ever taught us. David's eyes widened as he understood. You're not destroying their civilization. You're just cutting off their military. The hegemony government survives. Their people survive, but their ability to wage war ends today. Marcus smiled, and for the first time in years it was the smile David remembered from their childhood. Sometimes the best way to win a war is to make sure your enemy can't afford to keep fighting. Marcus, the risk you're taking is mine to take. Get our people ready, David, in 6 hours. You're going to have a chance to end this war without becoming the monsters ourselves. As the transmission ended, Marcus prepared for the most difficult battle of his career. Not because the enemies were stronger or more numerous than any he had faced before, but because for the first time since Titan Station, he was fighting to save his enemies as well as his friends. The ghost of Titan Station was about to learn whether redemption was possible, even for someone who had walked as far into darkness as he had. 6 hours later, the hegemony war machine began to die. It started with the destruction of Fleet Base Korvath, the primary staging area for their deep space operations. The nanobots that had laid dormant in the station's hull for months suddenly activated, consuming critical systems with mechanical precision. Life support remained intact. Artificial gravity continued functioning. But every weapon system, every ship construction facility, and every piece of military equipment simply dissolved into component atoms. Within minutes, similar scenarios played out across 15 star systems. Military installations that had taken decades to build were reduced to hollow shells in a matter of hours. Their weapons melted away while their personnel scrambled for evacuation pods. Supreme Commander Malthea stood in the Vorthak Prime Command Center, watching his empire's military might disappear from the tactical displays like stars going out one by one. Report, he demanded, his usual composure cracking as another fleet base went dark. Unknown weapon. Sir, stammered Intelligence Director Kaivan. Every military installation is being systematically destroyed, but there are no attacking ships, no energy signatures, nothing our sensors can detect. What about civilian areas? Untouched, sir. Whatever is doing this is targeting only military assets with surgical precision. On the main display, the 8,000 ship armada heading toward Earth had lost all contact with their support network. Fleet Admiral Zerex, commanding the assault force, found himself cut off from resupply, reinforcement, and most importantly, the quantum communication network that connected him to high command. Sir, reported his communications officer, we're receiving a transmission from Earth. They're requesting parley. Ignore it, Zerex ordered. We proceed with the mission. 8,000 ships are more than enough to deal with whatever primitive defenses they've prepared. But even as he spoke, Admiral Zerex could see his officers exchanging worried glances. Everyone had heard the stories about the human called the Ghost, about ships that vanished without explanation, about weapons that turned the hegemony's own technology against them. Those stories were starting to feel less like myths and more like warnings. Aboard the Earth Alliance flagship Armstrong, Admiral David Chen watched the long-range sensors as the hegemony fleet approached the outer solar system. His defensive forces were outnumbered 40-1, but for the first time since this crisis began, he felt something approaching hope. "Any word from Marcus?" asked Captain Elena Torres, who had transferred to the Armstrong to serve as David's tactical advisor. "Radio silent since he began his operation," David replied. "But look at this." He activated the tactical display showing the positions of both fleets. "The hegemony formation is starting to break apart. Without their command and control network, individual ship commanders are making their own decisions about approach vectors and engagement protocols." "There's still 8,000 ships," Elena pointed out. "Yes, but they're no longer one coordinated force. They're 8,000 separate ships, each operating independently." David smiled grimly. Marcus was right. Cut off the head, and the body becomes much easier to handle. 3 hours into the hegemony assault, what should have been humanity's darkest hour became something entirely different. The lead hegemony battleships entered Earth's outer defensive perimeter, expecting to face a desperate but doomed resistance. Instead, they found themselves target of the most sophisticated defensive network ever conceived. Hidden weapons platforms that had been disguised as asteroids opened fire with concentrated plasma bursts. Minefields that existed only as holographic projections suddenly became very real when ships tried to pass through them. And from seemingly empty space, Earth's defensive fleet materialized using stealth technology that made their ships nearly invisible until they opened fire. But the real surprise came when the hegemony ships tried to return fire. Their weapon systems had been infected with the same nanobots that had destroyed their military bases. As each ship attempted to charge its primary guns, the nanobots activated, turning the weapons into elaborate pieces of expensive scrap metal. "What's happening?" Fleet Admiral Xerax demanded as his flagship's main batteries simply stopped responding to commands. "Sir, our weapons are dissolving. The targeting systems are intact, but the actual weapons are just falling apart." On the tactical display, Xerax watched in horror as his seemingly invincible armada found itself defenseless in the face of humanity's counterattack. Ships that could have reduced planets to rubble were being systematically disabled by an enemy they couldn't even fight back against. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted less than 4 hours. When it was over, 6,000 hegemony ships had been disabled and captured. Another 1,500 had managed to escape into hyperspace, fleeing back toward hegemony territory with news of their impossible defeat. The remaining 500 had been destroyed when their commanders chose to self-destruct rather than surrender. Admiral David Chen stood on his bridge, looking at a display that showed more captured enemy vessels than the Earth Alliance had ships in its entire fleet. The greatest military threat humanity had ever faced had been neutralized without the loss of a single Earth ship. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from one of the stealth ships. It's him." Marcus Chen's image appeared on the main screen, but something was different about him. The haunted look that had shadowed his eyes since Titan Station was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. "David," he said simply, "it's over. The hegemony will spend the next 50 years rebuilding their military from scratch, assuming they can even maintain political unity without their war machine to keep the member worlds in line." Marcus smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "They'll be too busy dealing with internal rebellions to threaten anyone else. What about you? Are you coming home?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking off-screen at something David couldn't see. "I've been thinking about that, about what Sarah would want me to do now that the fighting is finally over. And she'd want me to help people, to use what I've learned for something better than war." Marcus looked back at the camera. The Allied worlds still need protection. There are other threats out there besides the hegemony. Pirates, raiders, rogue military units looking to carve out their own little empires. David understood. "You're not coming home." "I am home, David. Out here protecting people who can't protect themselves. It's what I should have been doing all along instead of just being an instrument of revenge." As the two brothers said their goodbyes, neither of them noticed the small fleets of rescued hegemony personnel being transferred to prison ships for processing. Nor did they see the grateful messages already arriving from dozens of worlds that had lived in fear of hegemony expansion. What they did see was the end of the greatest war their generation had known. and the beginning of something that might actually resemble peace. The ghost of Titan Station had finally found his way home. 1 year after the Battle of Earth, Ambassador Kethvar stood before the newly constructed memorial wall on Zephyr Prime, reading the names of those who had died in the Hegemony Wars. The wall stretched for nearly a kilometer, representing casualties from dozens of worlds and hundreds of battles fought over the span of 50 years. At the very end of the wall, in letters carved from earth marble, was a single human name, Sarah Chen, Research Specialist, Titan Station. Below her name was an inscription that had become famous throughout the Allied worlds. She died so that others might live. He lived so that others might be free. The dedication ceremony was beautiful, said Dr. Liana Vasquez, joining Kethvar at the memorial. I think Sarah would have approved. Has he seen it yet? Liana shook her head. Marcus doesn't come to ceremonies anymore. He says memorials are for the living, not the ghosts. They stood in comfortable silence, watching as families and dignitaries from across the galaxy came to pay their respects to the dead. The war was over, but its scars would take generations to heal. The hegemony officially dissolved yesterday. Kethvar mentioned casually. The member worlds couldn't agree on new leadership without their military to enforce unity. 7 separate governments now, none of them strong enough to threaten their neighbors. And their former territories? Mostly free. Some have formed new alliances, others are going it alone. A few requested membership in our confederation. Kethvar paused, watching a group of young Cheetaran children place flowers at the memorial. It's a different galaxy than it was a year ago. Better? Safer, certainly. The merchant routes that had been closed for decades are opening again. Trade is flourishing. The outer rim worlds aren't afraid to develop their resources anymore. A soft chime from Liana's communication device interrupted their conversation. She glanced at the message and smiled. Speaking of ghosts, she said, Marcus wants to meet with the Allied Council next week. Something about a new threat in the Andromeda contact zone. Kethvar's expression grew serious. The reports about aggressive machine intelligences. Apparently they're more than reports now. Marcus intercepted transmissions from a survey ship that went missing 3 weeks ago. The crew managed to send a final message before, she shrugged, before whatever happened to them happened, and he wants to investigate personally. He wants council authorization to recruit a task force. Volunteers only, he was very specific about that. People who understand the risks. Kethvar turned from the memorial wall to face her directly. What risks? The same risks we all understood when we first called him for help, Liana replied. The risk of asking Marcus Chen to solve our problems for us. Across the galaxy, in a region of space that didn't appear on any official charts, the phantasm hung in the shadow of a dead star. Marcus Chen sat in his observation deck, reading reports from the Andromeda contact zone while his ship's AI analyzed the fragmentary data from the lost survey vessel. Conclusions? He asked. The machine entities appeared to be systematically harvesting biological matter from inhabited worlds, the AI reported. Their technology is approximately 200 years ahead of current galactic standards. Conservative estimates suggest they could overwhelm current defensive capabilities within 18 months if they choose to expand toward populated systems. Marcus nodded, already running tactical scenarios in his head. There was always something. The hegemony was gone, but the galaxy was a big place full of things that wanted to hurt innocent people. Any indication they can be reasoned with? Negative. All evidence suggests they view biological life as a resource to be harvested rather than potential partners for communication. Then we stop them before they get started. Marcus activated his ship's communication array, preparing to contact the Allied Council with his assessment and recommendations. But first he opened a personal channel to Earth, where his brother was probably working late in his office at Fleet Command. Admiral David Chen's face appeared on the screen, showing the kind of exhaustion that came from rebuilding an entire military structure from the ground up. Marcus, David said with genuine pleasure, good to see you. How are the border patrols going? Quiet, mostly. Pirates are getting smarter about avoiding our patrol routes. Marcus leaned back in his chair. David, I need to ask you something. And I need you to give me an honest answer. Always. If I asked Earth Command to contribute ships and personnel to a task force heading into unknown territory to fight an enemy that could wipe out entire civilizations, what would they say? David was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking through the political and military implications. Officially, they'd want detailed intelligence reports, risk assessments, and probably 6 months of committee meetings before making a decision. And unofficially? Unofficially, after what you did to save Earth, they'd probably give you anything you asked for. David's expression grew concerned. Marcus, what have you found out there? Something that makes the hegemony look like playground bullies. Something that's going to require the kind of solution I specialize in. Do you need backup? Marcus smiled at his brother's immediate offer of support. Not yet. But if this goes badly, if this new threat turns out to be more than I can handle... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Make sure humanity remembers why we fight. Not for conquest or glory, but to protect the innocent. Marcus, I have to go, David. The Allied Council is waiting for my report. Marcus prepared to end the transmission, then stopped. David? Tell Mom and Dad that Sarah's work is finished. The agricultural techniques she developed are being used on 17 worlds now. Millions of people have food because of her research. I'll tell them. As the connection closed, Marcus turned back to his tactical displays and began planning humanity's next war. Outside his ship, the galaxy continued its ancient dance of stars and planets, civilizations rising and falling in the endless cycle of cosmic time. But in one small corner of that vast expanse, a human who had chosen to become a guardian continued his watch. The ghost of Titan Station was gone, replaced by something better, a protector who fought not from revenge or hatred, but from love for those who couldn't protect themselves. The galaxy was safer with Marcus Chen watching over it. And deep in the darkness between stars, new threats would soon learn what the hegemony had discovered too late, that humans didn't just fight to win. They fought to make sure their enemies never wanted to fight again. In the end, that made all the difference.